the second part of today's event. I'm very grateful to the chairman of the trust, Susie England. I'm very grateful to Alistair to allow me to do this. I just thought on the basis of what we do that I give a little presentation, and then I'll invite the chairman to say a few words, and then you're welcome to have a look at the journey of mankind over 3 millennia. So I started all this when I was 10 years old. I used to collect stamps like a lot of people used to do in those days. And one of my uncles gave me a box full of coins. They were all British coins from the East India Company time, max 100, 150 years old. So for a few years, I was the most popular guy in school because I would trade coins for stamps, which was very good. And then it just went on in medical school. And I was saying to somebody yesterday, when I was a second-year medical student, I did a little exhibition in medical school in Pakistan where I trained. And that day I realized what I was sitting on, because every newspaper in the country had my picture and my collection. And I said, gosh, it's something serious. Then I came to England in 1987, and I met two Scottish couple. They were teachers of history. I have never, ever met somebody who can read and speak such good Arabic. And they used to live in Outer Hebrides, which is like, the corner of Britain. And they knew the entire history of Asia at the back of the hands. So they have been my advisor for 20 years in this collection business. And they then introduced me to honorary professor of history in Oxford University, who is based in California. He's also helped me. So here we are. I'm going to start with this gentleman here, a very important guy. Now, in those days, there was no O-levels, etc., but this guy got out of wherever he went to, and at the age of 21, he set off from Macedonia. And in 12 years, he had the largest empire known to mankind, and the name was Alexander the Great. You'll see a couple of his coins here. Now, this man had a lot of pride of what he did. And when we talk about tyrants and dictators and kings and all sorts of bad things, I like history, and I've read his book, because when he traveled, he had his historian with him, and in real time, they wrote the history. And when he came, his ambition was that he wanted to get to the edge of the world. And the edge of the world was in the east. So he came down Central Asia, down Afghanistan, into northern Pakistan, and he came at the edge of Lahore, where there is the river Indus. When he reached there, the locals told him, you've been told the wrong stuff, because there's another river further on, and that was the Ganges. So then he said, right, that's the end of the world, I've got to go there. And when he wanted to do that, that was the only time in the 12-year history of Alexander the Great that his generals rebelled. They called a council, they called the boss, and they said, right, we've been away from our families for 12 years. I think it's time we go back. And this was the leadership skill of the greatest conqueror of the world. He listened to the troops. And he turned back, and he went back, unfortunately, to meet his death in a year later. Some people say of malaria, some people say he was poisoned, but at the age of 33, he passed away. The coin on this side is of our own great Queen Victoria. She, in the 19th century, ruled over the greatest empire known to mankind. We all know the sun never set, and that is true. So these are all the coins from that area. This is Alexander the Great, and you can see his empire. He started off from Macedonia, went all around. Eventually, they say he died in this area, which was in modern-day Iraq. They say from the swamps, the mosquitoes bit him, but it's still a mystery. We don't know where he's buried. He only had one child, born of a princess from Central Asia. Her name was Roxana, and his only child was buried, nobody knows exactly where, but she's buried in what is central Pakistan today, in a city called Multan, because when he did the conquest, he stopped in Multan for 6 months, because I suppose his child wasn't well and he wasn't well. And this, another set of coins which are very important I have, and this is again going back in history, and I really like this one. This is a guy called Augustus Caesar, and he's no ordinary chap. This man he was the first king of Rome. He was the adopted son of Julius Caesar. Basically, Julius Caesar didn't have any legitimate children of his own. So Julius Caesar adopted the grandson of his sister. That was the relationship. And Augustus Caesar, the month August named after him, also known as Octavius, though he was an adopted son, we all know how Caesar died. But this guy hunted down every killer of Julius Caesar and got rid of them with the help of his mate, Mark Antony. And then, as it always happens in history, and even, I suppose, power struggles happen everywhere, and then Mark Antony and Augustus Caesar fell apart. They fought each other. Antony was defeated. Antony committed suicide. A few days later, Cleopatra committed suicide. And this guy, Nero, notorious for so many things, was the last and the fifth great emperor of Rome at the time. After Augustus, it was Tiberius. After Tiberius, it was Caligula. After Caligula, it was Claudius. And then after Claudius, it was Nero. Now, Nero is known for his, he was very a tyrant and very bad, this, that, the other. But I'll give you both the versions because, yes, some of it is true. And there is that famous story that Rome was burning and he was playing the fiddle. Well, the anti-guys will say that Rome was being burned down because he needed 25 acres to build the golden palace, which he did build later on, but people accused him of that. On the other hand, Nero had his other thing where he used to actively incognito go into the people and help them with money and goods and food, etc. And one thing I forgot to tell, which is very important for students of religious history, that Augustus Caesar was the Caesar when Christ was crucified. So he was the boss at the time. And well, Nero was, again, the guys who are anti-Nero also point out a very important fact, which in today's society we would also agree was bad. He was brought onto the throne as a teenager by his mother. Once he established himself, 6 years later, he got his mother killed. So this guy was a bit dodgy. Then we come to the Middle East. The Umayyads were the caliphs of Damascus. They came immediately after the death of the Holy Prophet and the main caliphs of Islam. Now, just to give you a bit of history before you start looking, is that during the time of the Prophet and nearly 80 years after him, there were no Islamic coins. They were using Byzantine Roman coins of Heracl and of Sasanian coins from Persia. And they would super stamp them as caliphate coins. This coin, have a look at it very closely, is the first Islamic minted coin, and it is on the banknote of Saudi Arabia today. And 6 months ago, this was auctioned in London for £3.72 million. And you're going to see 3 of them today here. This is one of them. So this is a very important one, and this comes from Damascus. Now, we've all heard of the stories of the Arabian Nights. And for those who haven't, there was this king, and we can dispute who the king was, but the story was that he had a lady who would tell him a story at night. And if she finished the story before dawn, the head was chopped off. So it carried on, and then Sherazad, she was the daughter of one of his ministers. She came and she started telling him the story. And all these stories we hear of Sinbad the sailor, Aladdin, they are all the stories of the Arabian Nights. So she kept the story going she never ended the story. So it carried on for 1001 nights, and that is the Arabian Nights. And in the end, when the king really appreciated that she was talented, he sort of married her, etc. But 2 kingdoms claim it, the caliphates of Baghdad and the kings of Persia. And you will see both the coins here. I've got of both the rulers. Then we come to the Ottomans, the caliphates of Turkey. Now, one of the greatest caliphs of Turkey was Suleiman the Magnificent. So that's one of his coins here. I've got it over here, minted in 1526. Now, this time period is very, very important for you to look at the world. So in 1526, there was Suleiman the Magnificent here in Turkey. There was Queen Elizabeth I here in Britain. There was Babur, the founder of the Mughal Empire in India, and Shah Tahmasp, the greatest king of Persia in Persia. So we had 4 superpowers at the time. But if you look at it, as a medical doctor, I will say Queen Elizabeth and company were way ahead of the others, because that was also the year when the charter of the Royal College of Surgeons was given. It wasn't Queen Elizabeth, sorry, it was Henry VIII. So Henry VIII was giving the charter of the Royal College of Surgeons while the other 3 kings were busy in poetry and dance. So, that's when the change happened in the world as far as power is concerned. I've got some collection of the Kingdom of Cordoba. The Moors ruled Spain for several hundred years, and you'll see the history and you'll see some of the coins associated with it. Now, this is a separate corner, and you've got to appreciate when I translate this to modern times. We've all heard of Genghis Khan. We may have heard of his grandson, Halaku Khan. And he had a great-great-great-grandson called Temur Lame. These 3 gentlemen were responsible for the slaughter of 10% of the human race. And Genghis Khan, when he used to conquer places, he used to tell them this, that he is the punishment of God on earth. Because you guys have done wrong, I've come to sort you out. And if you translate 10% of the world today, 700 million people, can you imagine? That's all of Europe killed by these guys. So they were really bad guys. Now, I'm not here to make a political decision who's good or who's bad, but from the coin side, there is an importance for you to appreciate. This is the original coin of Genghis Khan. Written in it in Persian script is Khaqan-e-Azam, King of Kings. Now, I have one of this over here. You will see it. And it took me a long time to get it. The reason is Genghis Khan did not have a capital because he was a marauder. He used to conquer and move on. This was the only coin minted in northern Afghanistan, modern-day Afghanistan, because he stopped there for a while. And the local kings were so scared that they started minting coins in his name so that he wouldn't conquer them, assuming that they were part of them. Nevertheless, he did. He conquered Afghanistan and decimated most of it. And this is a coin of Halaku Khan. Then the magnificent Mughals. As you know, the kingdom of India, the Mughals, 300 years they ruled. They were the descendants of the Mongols. The guy who founded the Mughal Empire, Babur, came from Central Asia, Uzbekistan. I actually went there 2 months ago. And the ultimate was the King Shah Jahan, who made the Taj Mahal. We all know it. You will see coins of Shah Jahan there. And you will also see a picture of the last king of India, Bahadur Shah Zafar, who was defeated and captured by the British East India Company in 1858. And I've got an original photo of him being captured by the British Captain Hudson of the East India Company. Now, I put that for a reason, and the reason is, can you imagine the richest empire the world ever knew? Their last king was exiled in Rangoon on a stipend of 12 rupees a week in a room which was 16 square feet. I mean, William Dalrymple, I don't know if you've heard of him, he writes beautiful books about India. He's written an entire book on the last emperor of India, and he describes the last 5 years of this guy. The empire which ruled India for 300 years sadly ended like that. Then we come to the kings of India. There were many sultans. They were not Mughals. They ruled in different parts of India of various sizes. This one was probably the last king of India who was conquered by the British. And that's him there. You can see looks like he's on his last bits. He was killed in battle. If you go to the Victoria and Albert Museum, you'll see his sword and the other stuff which was taken. He was from Mysore, which is southern India. And I've got a couple of gold coins of his. So Tipu Sultan was, it was around 1790s. He was the last resistance to the British conquest of India. I've got a letter, handwritten letter of Lord Canning. Again, in my journeys of history, I picked this up because this guy is very important. There were many viceroys and governor generals in England, in India, but this man is very important because he did have a talent. He was the Governor General of East India Company. Now, for those who don't know, East India Company was a private company which ruled India for more than 100 years, and they were just making money like any company would do. But in 1857, the locals rebelled, and there was a huge mutiny, and hundreds of people, soldiers and innocent civilians from both sides, died, and eventually the British East India Company suppressed the rebellion, and the guy who did that was Charles Canning. He was the Governor General of India for 2 years, 56, 57, 58. Now, when the news reached England, there was an uproar in Parliament because the Parliament wanted an account from East India Company that why were so many English people killed, etc. And they basically nationalized East India Company, and Queen Victoria became the Empress of India in 1858. But then the Crown found that this guy was so talented that they kept him as the first Viceroy of India from 1858 to 62. So he was like the guy who did both the jobs. I've got a letter, a handwritten letter of his, which he wrote to one of his colleagues. I picked it up in an auction. Now, this is obviously the last photo I'm going to show you because that's where my history interest finishes. And that was the glory of the Raj in India, which, like I said, the Empress came in 1858. She unfortunately died in 1901. And then from 1901 to 47, we had 2 world wars. And then the entire world dynamic changed. And this is the Delhi Darbar. I mean, the British seriously ruled India for 200 years. It was only once where the king visited India. It wasn't Queen Victoria. I think it was George V. And this is a nice picture of Queen Victoria. So that is it for the coin exhibition.